The year was 1878, and the place was Coyote Ridge, Arizona Territory. It was less a town and more a scar, carved halfway between the promise of the railroad tracks glinting east and the vast, dusty pastures rolling west toward New Mexico. The land itself was a character, all red dust that stained the hems of skirts and the souls of men. It was a place of sharp edges and brittle plants, and after the rare blessing of rain, the air smelled thick and clean, like creosote and wet grit. Into this thin air stepped Evelyn Hart. She was 19 years old, and she carried the high, clear innocence of the Missouri green she had left behind. Her father, a minister, was recently in the ground, and she had come west on the jolting stagecoach with one small trunk and a head full of book learning. She was to stay at the way station, the only two-story frame building in Coyote Ridge, kept by her mother's sister, Agnes Black. Agnes was a practical woman, widowed by the desert and made strong by its indifference. She wiped her hands on her apron as she watched her niece stare out the window, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of ochre and burnt sienna. "It is not Missouri, child," Agnes said, her voice as dry as the air. "It is big," Evelyn replied, her voice soft. She was thinking of the schoolhouse she wanted to build, a small, simple room, but one filled with letters and light, a place for the children of this raw land to learn. She had seen them already, small faces peeking from alleys, some with skin the color of cream, some the color of the red earth itself, some the sun-baked brown of old leather. "Big swallows little out here," Agnes warned. Turning back to her bread dough, "You keep that dream of yours quiet for a spell. Best to learn the lay of the land first." The lay of the land was complicated. Coyote Ridge was a knot of tensions pulled tight. The Anglo cattlemen, like Hargrove, whose ranch spread over the horizon, believed the land was theirs by right of hoof and branding iron. The Hispano families, who had been here long before the Anglos, watched their grazing lands shrink. The Dine, the Navajo, were pushed to the edges, their presence tolerated only as long as they remained invisible. And now, the railroad cut through everyone, a snake of iron and money, represented by men like Whitlock, a lawyer who carried more power in his leather satchel than a gunfighter wore on his hip. In this town, the law was a thin thread held by one man, Sheriff Thomas Ortega. He was a man of Hispano blood, old and weathered, who understood that true peace was not about enforcing rules, but about balancing impossible pressures. He walked his rounds with his eyes open, knowing that the real law, the law of the firearm, was always faster than the law of the book. And then there was Keona Nez. He was not of the town. He lived beyond it, in the high mesas, in a hogan made of earth and memory. Keona was Dine. He had once worn the blue coat of the cavalry, a scout hired to protect settlers from bandits, a job he took because it fed his people and kept him from the reservations. He had never guided the soldiers against his own kin. That was a line he would not cross. Now, he lived in silence. He repaired the hidden water traps that caught the rain. He moved through the canyons like the wind, and sometimes he guided a lost traveler or a prospector in exchange for flour or bullets. The people of Coyote Ridge spoke of him in whispers. They called him the Wolf Shadow. They told stories of him appearing from nowhere during a sandstorm to lead a trapped wagon to safety, or leaving a freshly dressed deer at the door of a starving widow. They respected him, this silent Navajo warrior, but they also feared him. He was a man who did not fit their world, and that made him dangerous in their eyes. Keona, for his part, watched the town. He saw the new stakes Hargrove's men hammered into the ground, claiming springs that were not theirs to claim. He saw the tracks of heavy boots near the sacred marker stones, saw the stones themselves overturned, desecrated. This was a deeper violence than theft. It was an unraveling of the world, a disrespect that promised bad endings. He knew of Sheriff Ortega, a man he respected for his stillness. He also knew of Whitlock, the railroad lawyer, a man Keona recognized by his scent, the scent of paper and greed. Whitlock was in the saloon most nights, talking of clearing the corridor, a clean-sounding phrase that Kiona knew meant displacement and pain. Evelyn Hart, unaware of the deep currents of hate and history, began to walk the town. She held her head high, her bonnet a pale flower against the red dust. She spoke to the shopkeeper about slates and chalk. She asked Sheriff Ortega if there was a building, any building, that could be used. He tipped his hat to her, his expression kind but weary. "Señorita Hart, this is a good thing you wish to do, a noble thing." He paused, looking at the saloon where Hargrove's men were drinking, then at the alley where two dying children watched him with wide, dark eyes. But it is not simple. Evelyn found that out that evening. She sat with her Aunt Agnes in their small parlor behind the way-station kitchen. She had been bubbling with her plans, explaining how she could teach English and arithmetic to everyone, all together. Agnes set down her mending. Her hands, calloused and strong, rested on her knees. "Evelyn," she said, and the girl fell silent at the seriousness in her aunt's tone. "I am going to tell you the truth of this place, and it is not a sermon from your father's pulpit. You want to build a school. That is fine, but who will you let in the door?" "Why, everyone," Evelyn said, confused. "All the children who wish to learn." Agnes shook her head. A small, sad movement. "Here, a name and the color of your skin decide who you are. It decides who gets served in the saloon, who gets a fair price at the general store, and who gets to water their horses first. You put Hargrove's boy next to a Hispano child, and you will have a fight. You try to bring a Navajo child into that room, and you will have a fire. That is the way of it. Here, child, name and skin color decide who drinks first." Evelyn felt a coldness creep into her heart that had nothing to do with the desert night. This was a poverty her father's books had never prepared her for. Later that night, the town held one of its poor, infrequent gatherings. A fiddler played a thin, scraping tune near the saloon, and some of the railroad men and their families danced in the street, their boots kicking up the red dust. The laughter was loud, brittle. From the edge of the mesa, Quionanez watched. He stood beside his horse, a shadow among the juniper. He was too far to be seen, but he could see them. He saw the pale circle of Evelyn Hart, standing near her aunt, watching the dancers with a look of profound loneliness. He saw Sheriff Ortega, standing apart, his hands behind his back, a guardian watching a game he could not control. He saw Hargrove's men, drinking and shouting, their pistols heavy on their hips. The sounds of the fiddle and the laughter reached him, thin and sharp, but from further away, from an encampment hidden in the folds of the earth. Another sound came to him. It was the sound of a hand drum, a steady heartbeat, and a single voice singing a dying song of the night, of the stars, and of the long walk. Kiona stood between the two sounds, the two worlds. The town lights were a false fire, bright and chaotic. The song was an old truth, distant and fading. He felt a familiar ache, the ache of a man who belonged to neither, a man who was, in his own way, as lost as the 19-year-old girl from Missouri staring into the darkness. He turned his horse and, without a sound, melted back into the night. The quiet of the high desert broke not with a bang, but with a crack. A single shot, sharp and deliberate, echoed off the canyon walls near Stone Cup Well. It was followed by a ragged volley, the sound mean and chaotic. Quionanez heard it from the ridge. He had been tracking a mountain cat that was getting too bold, but this sound, this human sound of panic, turned his head. He moved without thinking, his moccasins silent on the rock, until he could see the well below. A small wagon train, just 2 wagons and a few outriders, was pinned down. Masked riders, perhaps a dozen, were circling, kicking up a storm of red dust. They were not trying to rob, not yet. They were trying to scare, to break. A woman's scream, high and thin, cut through the gunfire. One of the wagons, its canvas top already peppered with holes, tipped precariously. A small boy, no more than 5 or 6 years old, tumbled out and rolled into the open, landing stunned in the dust. One of the masked riders, the leader, saw the boy. He laughed, a cruel sound that carried in the dry air, and he began to turn his horse. Kiona did not charge. He was not a soldier anymore. He was a hunter. He raised his old rifle, its stock worn smooth as glass. He did not aim for the man. He aimed for the rock face 100 yards to the man's left. The bullet struck, whining and sending a spray of stone chips. The rider's horse reared, confused. Kiona shifted his position by 10 feet, disappearing behind a juniper. He fired again. This time, the bullet sang past the ear of a man on the far side of the circle. The man flinched, firing his pistol into the empty air. The ambushers stopped. They were being hunted. The shots were coming from everywhere, from nowhere. They were caught between their prey and a ghost. Kiona used the echoes, making his one rifle sound like 3, placing his shots with precision not to kill, but to dismantle. He shot the canteen off one man's hip, spinning him in the saddle. He shot the hat clean off another. It was enough. The leader cursed, firing one last angry shot at the rocks, and then spurred his horse east, his men scrambling to follow. A disorganized cloud of dust and frustration. They were paid to bully, not to fight the wolf shadow. Kiona waited until the last sound of their horses faded. He slid down the scree slope, his movements fluid and quick. The settlers were emerging, dazed and terrified. The boy was still on the ground, his face pale with dust, his small chest heaving with silent sobs. Kiona stopped a few feet away, standing over him. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with terror. Kiona's face remained impassive, but he held up his empty hand, palm forward. He just nodded, a single, slow gesture of reassurance. He whistled, a low, soft sound, and the boy's mother, who had been peering from behind a broken barrel, ran and snatched him up, burying her face in his hair. The gunfire had been heard in Coyote Ridge. Within the hour, 2 wagons appeared, moving fast. One was Sheriff Ortega's buckboard. The other belonged to Agnes Black. Evelyn Hart sat beside her aunt, her knuckles white as she gripped the seat. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. She was carrying a wooden box filled with bandages, laudanum, and carbolic. When they arrived, the scene was one of tired chaos. Men were riding the toppled wagon. Women were calming crying children. And in the middle of it all, a tall, silent man was helping one of the settlers splice a broken axle. He moved with an economy of motion, his strength obvious but never strained. Evelyn stared. This was him. This was the wolf shadow. The man whispered about in the saloon and the general store. He was not a ghost. He was solid, real. He was dressed in denim trousers and a simple cotton shirt, his black hair tied back with a leather strip. He turned his head, his senses catching her stare, and his eyes met hers. They were dark, those eyes, and impossibly deep. They held the stillness of the mesa and the sharpness of the hawk. Evelyn felt a jolt, as if the ground had shifted beneath her. He held her gaze for only a second, then turned back to his work. But the connection had been made. The rumor was flesh. Agnes was already at work, her voice crisp. "Who has hit you? Sit down. Evelyn, fetch the water. We clean the wounds first." Evelyn, her hands trembling, went to do as she was told, her mind reeling. She helped her aunt clean a long, shallow graze on a man's forearm, the sting of the carbolic making him hiss. The thud of heavy horses announced a new arrival. Baron Hargrove and 4 of his men rode up, their horses lathered. Hargrove was a big man, his face a map of broken veins, his belly pushing against his embroidered vest. He did not look concerned. He looked angry. "What in damnation is this?" he boomed, his eyes sweeping the scene. He ignored the settlers, ignored the sheriff, and settled his furious gaze on Kiona. "You, Nez." He spurred his horse forward, stopping just short of Kiona. "I find my fences cut and 20 head of prime cattle gone this morning. And now I find you here, in the middle of a gunfight. You have been a busy man." One of the settlers, the man whose son Kiona had saved, stepped forward. "Wait a minute. Mr. Hargrove, he did not do this. He saved us. Masked riders attacked us, and he drove them off." Hargrove spat into the dust. Masked riders, or just his kin? Covering his retreat, he pointed a thick, gloved finger at Kiona. "He is a rustler, and now he is an agitator. It is always the same." Kiona stood straight, his hands loose at his sides. He did not look at Hargrove. He looked at the horizon, his stillness a shield that Hargrove's anger could not penetrate. "This is what happens when we tolerate this," Hargrove shouted to the settlers, his voice taking on a political tone. "This spring is a magnet for trouble. It is not safe." He turned to Sheriff Ortega, who had been watching silently. "Ortega, you know the railroad has filed claim to this entire corridor. For the security of this territory, I am closing this well." A wave of protest rose from the settlers. "You cannot," cried one woman. "It is the only clean water for 50 miles. "I can," Hargrove said, his voice cold. "It is railroad property. I am acting as their agent to secure their asset. My men will fence it off by morning." Sheriff Thomas Ortega dismounted. He was not a large man, and his hair was more salt than pepper, but he moved with an authority that did not depend on size. He stepped between Hargrove and Kiona. "Senor Hargrove, that is a bold and foolish statement," Ortega said, his voice quiet. Yet it cut through the murmurs. "This well has been public land since my grandfather's time. A piece of paper from a lawyer in the East does not change the thirst of the people." Hargrove's face turned a deeper shade of red. He yanked a folded document from his coat pocket. "This is not just paper. Old man, this is from Mr. Whitlock. It is a legal injunction. The railroad owns the water rights. We are stopping the squatters and the thieves from stealing it." Ortega took the paper. He did not read it. He knew what it would say. He was caught, as he always was, between the money of the railroad and the needs of the people. He folded it and handed it back. He looked at Kiona. "Mr. Nez, you have heard the accusation. 20 head of cattle." Kiona's gaze finally shifted. He looked at the sheriff, a flicker of respect in his dark eyes. He spoke, and his voice was low, like stones rubbing together at the bottom of a dry wash. "He lies." He says, Hargrove mocked. Ortega held up one weathered hand. "I am the law in Coyote Ridge. Senor Hargrove, I do not act on loud voices. I act on evidence." He turned to the settlers. "And I do not close wells because one man is afraid." He faced Hargrove again, his eyes hard. "I need time. I will have 3 days. 3 days to investigate this ambush and this claim of rustling. Until then, the well remains open. I will post a guard myself, if I must." 3 days, Hargrove bellowed. "You are a fool. Ortega, you are letting the fox guard the henhouse." 3 days, Ortega repeated. "Or you can try to arrest Mr. Nez yourself, and then my investigation will be into your murder." The air was thick, stretched tight. Hargrove stared at Ortega, then at Kiona. Kiona had not moved, but he looked like a cougar about to spring. Hargrove was a bully, not a fool. He knew when to fold a bad hand. 3 days, Hargrove snarled. "Then my men will be back, and we will have this well." He wrenched his horse around, his men following, throwing up a cloud of angry dust. Evelyn had watched the entire exchange, her apron stained with water and a stranger's blood. She had seen the power of Hargrove's rage and the power of Kiona's silence. She saw the flimsy piece of paper that Hargrove waved like a weapon, and she saw the worn badge on Ortega's vest, a small piece of tin against a mountain of greed. Her aunt's words came back to her. Name and skin color decide who drinks first. This, she realized, was what it looked like. This was the first lesson. Justice on paper versus justice in the dust. As the settlers packed up, grateful to be alive. Kiona moved away from the group. His eyes were not on the departing wagons. They were on the ground, scanning the churned-up earth where Hargrove's men had been. He crouched, his fingers hovering over a single, perfect boot print, pressed deep where a man had dismounted. It was a military-style boot, but the heel was unique, worn with a small, star-shaped flaw. Kiona's jaw tightened. He knew that print. He had seen it before. In the New Mexico territory, near the scene of a massacre the army had blamed on Apaches. It belonged to a man named Silas Creed, a man with hair the color of sun-bleached bone, a man who had left the army to become a mercenary, a man who killed for sport and for gold. So, Hargrove had finally done it. He had hired Silas Creed. This was not about cattle. This was not about a well. This was an escalation. This was a prelude to removal. That night, the wind howled, a lonely, mournful sound that swept down from the mesas. Kiona did not go to his hogan. He rode high, to a place among the sheltering rocks, a place the dying had used for ceremonies for 1,000 years. It was marked by standing stones, arranged to greet the sun. He found what he knew he would find. The largest stone, the one that honored the first man, had been toppled. It was split in two, the fresh white break gleaming in the moonlight, the act of a sledgehammer. And in the dirt next to it, pressed deep as if for emphasis, was the clear, sharp print of a star-patterned heel. This was not just vandalism. This was a sacrilege. It was an attack on the Cha'idi, a severing of the line, a purposeful poke in the eye of the sacred. A cold, precise anger filled Kiona. Hargrove and his lawyer wanted to own the land. This man, Silas Creed, wanted to poison it. Evelyn could not sleep. She sat by the window in her small room, the wind rattling the glass. She kept seeing the confrontation at the well. She saw the lie in Hargrove's eyes and the weary truth in Ortega's, and she saw Kiona Nez, standing like a rock in the middle of it all. She shivered, though the night was not cold. She turned from the window, and in the pale moonlight, she saw something on the sill. It was small, green, and intricate. She picked it up. It was a small charm, a fetish, woven from the sharp, strong fibers of the yucca plant. It was tied in a complex knot she did not recognize. Strong and resilient, it had not been there when she left with her aunt. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, who had left it. The wolf shadow. He had come and gone without a sound, a ghost in her own house. Agnes, checking on her, saw it in her hand. "What is that child?" "I am not sure," Evelyn whispered, her fingers tracing the rough, strong fibers. "A gift, I think." It was not a charm against evil. Kiona did not deal in such things. Miles away, standing over the broken sacred stone, he knew what he had left her. The yucca plant was the toughest thing in the desert. It held water when all else was dry. It endured the worst heat and the deepest cold. Its roots held the earth together. He had left it for her as a piece of advice, the only kind he knew how to give. Be strong, endure, hold fast. The 3 days Sheriff Ortega had bought were a heavy, humid blanket thrown over the town. The air felt thick, waiting for the next crackle of thunder. It came not as gunfire, but as a polite knock on the way station door. Evelyn, her hands dusted with flour, opened it to find Mr. Whitlock. The railroad lawyer stood on the porch, hat in hand, a thin smile on his lips. He was a man made of smooth surfaces, from his polished boots to his silvering hair. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice like oiled leather, "a pleasure to see you in the daylight. May I have a moment of your time? It is a matter of some civic importance." Evelyn, wary, led him into the small parlor. She remained standing, forcing him to keep the visit brief. "I will not mince words. Miss Hart," Whitlock began, placing his satchel on the table. "I have heard you are a woman of education, a woman who, I am told, wishes to bring the light of knowledge to this frontier." "I wish to start a school." "Yes," she said, her hands clasped tightly. "Excellent progress. That is the very word I was looking for. He opened his satchel and produced a sheaf of papers. The railroad agrees. We are, in fact, prepared to build a proper schoolhouse, right next to the new depot. We are prepared to offer you the post of teacher, with a salary, a very respectable one. Evelyn's heart gave a painful leap. A salary, a real school. That is incredibly generous. Mr. Whitlock. We believe in community. Miss Hart, he said, his smile broadening. All we require is the support of the town's leading citizens. A formality. Really. He slid one paper across the table and offered her a pen. This is just a petition, showing that the good people of Coyote Ridge support our new water line. It will bring clean, reliable water straight from the high springs. A modern marvel. It will secure our town's future. Evelyn picked up the paper. Her eyes scanned the legal text, a skill her father had insisted she learn. She saw the lines about exclusive access and priority usage for railroad partners. She saw the map, a thin black line that cut directly across the lands the Dine used for grazing, the line that connected all their sacred springs. This line, she said, her voice quiet. It takes the water from the Dine lands, from the Stone Cup well. Whitlock gave a paternalistic little laugh. Miss Hart, it secures the water for the town. We cannot have vital resources under the control of itinerant, unreliable parties. This is about security, civilization. Surely you see the logic. Evelyn put the paper down. You are offering me a school, Mr. Whitlock, in exchange for my signature to help disenfranchise the people who live here. The lawyer's smile tightened. I am offering you a chance to be a part of the future, Miss Hart. Instead of a relic of the past, think on it. He left the papers on the table and tipped his hat. I will be in town for 2 more days. When he was gone, Evelyn sank into a chair, her legs trembling. Her Aunt Agnes came in, wiping her hands on her apron. She had heard it all. A salary, Agnes said, her voice flat. She sat down heavily, and for the first time, Evelyn saw how very tired her aunt looked. We need it. Evelyn, the way station. The mortgage is due in 30 days. We are short, very short. The words hung in the air, heavy and awful. To Evelyn, the choice had seemed clear, a simple matter of right and wrong. Now, it was tangled in loyalty, in her aunt's survival, in the very roof over their heads. He is asking me to trade the water of one people for the future of another, Evelyn whispered, tears stinging her eyes. I know what he is asking, Agnes said, her gaze on the cracked floorboards. I am just telling you the price of our own water. Evelyn looked at the paper again, at the hateful, precise words. The water discrimination clause, as she thought of it, was a poison pill. She pushed the papers away. I cannot, Agnes, she said, her voice small but firm. I cannot. We will find another way. Agnes looked at her niece, a long, measuring gaze. Then she nodded. A slow, grim acceptance. Then we had best pray for a miracle, child, because I'm all out of ideas. The second day of Ortega's truce brought another offer. This time, the approach was not subtle. Baron Hargrove found Evelyn as she was leaving the general store, a small bag of beans in her hand. He stepped in front of her, blocking the boardwalk, his bulk eclipsing the sun. Miss Hart, he said, his voice a low rumble. He was not smiling. Mr. Hargrove. She tried to step around him. He moved with her. I hear you were at the well. Saw the whole thing. Saw that red-skin rustler. I saw Mr. Nez save a child, sir, and I saw you make false accusations. Hargrove laughed. A short, barking sound. You have spirit. I like that. But you are new here. You do not understand how things work. He leaned in, his voice dropping. I need a witness. Someone respectable. Someone who will tell Sheriff Ortega that they saw Kiona Nez driving my cattle that morning. Someone like you. You are asking me to lie, Evelyn said, horrified. I am asking you to be a good neighbor. I am asking you to help protect this town from a savage." He gestured to the store. "You do that for me, and your aunt's troubles are over. Her bill here wiped clean. A standing credit for as long as she needs. Protection. No one will bother you or your little school project. I will see to it." The offer was so blunt, so naked in its corruption, that it cleared the fog of fear and doubt from Evelyn's mind. The choice was not complicated at all. It was just ugly. "I will not lie for you, Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the afternoon air. "Not for credit, not for protection, and not for you. Now, if you will please excuse me." She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his chest. He did not try to stop her. He just watched her go. His eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. She made it to the alley behind the way station, her heart hammering. She leaned against the rough wood, trying to catch her breath, when a voice slid out of the shadows. "That was a foolish thing. Brave, but very foolish." She spun around. A man emerged from the deep shadow of the overhang. He was not tall, but he moved with a predator's grace. His hair was a pale, sun-bleached blonde, almost white. His eyes were the color of a faded blue sky. He wore a fine boot, and Evelyn could see the star-shaped flaw in the heel, caked with red mud. It was Silas Creed. He did not touch her. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides, as he looked her over. "Hargrove is a hammer," he said, his voice soft, almost conversational. "He breaks things. Whitlock is a pen. He steals things. They are very loud. They do not understand this country." He took a step closer. Evelyn was pinned, her back against the wall. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, and something else, something metallic and cold. "Out here," he whispered, "silence is a virtue, a real virtue. People who talk too much, who see too much, who have too much spirit, they tend to get planted. This earth just swallows them right up. It would be a shame to see such a pretty flower get swallowed up." He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently flick the ribbon on her bonnet. The gesture was intimate, a violation that made her skin crawl. "You have a good evening, Miss Hart." He was gone. He did not walk away. He simply melted back into the shadows, his star-heeled boots making no sound. Evelyn slid to the ground, her bag of beans spilling into the dust. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. It was full dark when she found the strength to move. She stumbled back toward the light of the way station's kitchen. As she rounded the corner, she almost ran into a solid form. It was Keona Nez. He was standing on the porch, talking quietly with her Aunt Agnes. He held a bundle of dried herbs in his hand. He looked at Evelyn, and his eyes, which had seemed so fierce and distant at the well, now seemed to see everything. He saw her pale face, her trembling hands, the spilled beans by her feet. He looked at Agnes, then back at Evelyn. He spoke one word to her aunt. "No." Agnes looked at Evelyn's face and nodded, her own face pale. "Go on, child. It is all right." Keona said nothing to Evelyn. He simply turned and began to walk, a silent command for her to follow. Numbly, she did. He was leading her home, just walking her from the back of the way station to the front. But it felt like he was crossing a vast distance with her. It was the first time they had been truly alone. The desert night was enormous around them. The sky was a spray of white-hot diamonds, so bright it seemed to hum. The fiddler in the saloon was a thin, reedy sound, easily swallowed by the immensity of the night. She walked beside him. He was just a shadow, but he was the most solid thing she had ever known. He moved without a sound, his feet seeming to know the earth in a way her boots never would. The air smelled of dust and the sharp, clean perfume of sagebrush. From the hills, a coyote called, a lonely, yipping cry. Evelyn realized her trembling had stopped. The terror that Silas Creed had planted in her was receding, pushed back by the vast, quiet presence of the man next to her. He had not offered her protection. He had not offered her words. He had simply been there. He was a part of the night, a part of the earth, and for these few seconds, he was sharing that peace with her, a fragile, unspoken harmony. It was the first true breath she had taken since she arrived in this land. The next morning, the news came. It came in the form of an old dying shepherd, his face a swollen mask of bruises, his arm broken. Agnes and Evelyn found him collapsed by their well. They brought him inside, and while Agnes set the bone, Evelyn cleaned the cuts. Sheriff Ortega arrived, his face grim. The old man told his story in a low, pained voice. Hargrove's men. They had built a fence overnight, cutting off the old grazing trail to the high pastures. When he had protested, they had beaten him. They had beaten him with their rifle butts and left him for dead. Later that day, Ortega sat in his office, the tin star heavy on his chest. On his desk were two items. The first was the old shepherd's testimony, which meant nothing without a white man to back it. The second was a receipt from the bank's ledger, which he had procured with a great deal of quiet pressure. It showed a large withdrawal from Hargrove's account and a payment for security services to a man named Silas Creed. He had all the pieces. He had the motive, he had the weapon, and he had the victim, but he had no witness. He had no one who would, or could, stand in a courtroom and point a finger at the pale-haired man and the rich cattle baron. He was a sheriff with a puzzle he could not solve, a lawman with no law to wield. Kiona heard the news of the shepherd from the wind itself. He knew. This was the work of the man with the star-heeled boot. That night, Kiona stood in the shadows across from the saloon. He watched Silas Creed step out, laughing with two of Hargrove's men. Creed was drunk, his movements lazy. Kiona's hand rested on the knife at his belt. It would be simple, a shadow in the alley, a single, silent thrust, the old way, the warrior's way. It would solve Ortega's problem. It would avenge the old shepherd. It would end the threat to Evelyn. He could feel the pull of it, the simple, clean logic of removing the poison. But as he watched, he saw Evelyn Hart cross the street, her head high, carrying a book. She was heading to the small, windowless adobe hut where she had decided to start her school, with or without Whitlock's money. He saw Sheriff Ortega, making his slow rounds, a single, weary man holding a candle against a hurricane. If he killed Creed, he would confirm every fear they had of him. He would become the savage Hargrove claimed he was. He would betray the fragile hose-ho he had felt walking with Evelyn, and he would shatter the thin shield of law that Ortega was dying to protect. He would be validating the law of the gun, the very thing he was trying to fight. But if he did nothing, if he let Creed and Hargrove and Whitlock win, if he let them beat old men and steal water and threaten women, that was a betrayal of his people, of the earth, of the sacred stones Creed had broken. He was trapped, a warrior without a war, a protector without a path, to kill or not to kill. Both choices were a kind of defeat. He faded back into the darkness, the dilemma a cold, hard stone in his gut. Evelyn Hart did not get her miracle. She made one. She found a warehouse, the property of a freight company that had gone bust, its windows boarded up and its floor thick with the dust of failed enterprise. It was owned by no one, and thus, for a moment, belonged to everyone. She and Agnes swept it out. They found old crates for seats and a single, cracked slate. Her first day, 5 children came. 2 were Hispano, the children of a washerwoman, their eyes bright and curious. 1 was the son of the Anglo blacksmith, a boy with calloused hands and a sullen mouth. And 2, brought by their mother from the encampment outside town, were dying. They were wrapped in small, colorful blankets and watched her with a silence that was absolute. Evelyn, her heart a drum, stood before them. "Welcome," she said, her voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "My name is Miss Hart, and we are going to learn how to read the world." By the 3rd day, she had 9 pupils. The small, strange gathering did not go unnoticed. 2 of Hargrove's men, their spurs ringing on the floorboards. showed up in the middle of her lesson on the letter A. They slouched in the wide doorway, their hats pushed back, their expressions a mix of boredom and menace. "Well, looky here, Jake," one said, loud enough to stop the lesson. "The little lady's got a proper menagerie, teaching 'em to read what you gonna teach 'em to read. Miss Hart Hargrove's no trespassing signs." The children shrank. The blacksmith's boy looked ready to bolt. Evelyn put herself between the men and the children. Her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice shaking but not breaking. "Please leave." Or what the man said, taking a step inside. He grinned, showing brown teeth. "You gonna have one of these little coyotes bite me?" "No," said a low voice from behind them. The men turned. Keona Nez was standing just outside the doorway, in the shadow, his arms crossed. He had not been there a second ago. He was just there. He did not look at the men. He was looking at Evelyn. A calm, assessing gaze. The two cowboys tensed. This was not a drunk they could push around. This was the wolf shadow. This was the man their new pale-haired boss, Silas Creed, had warned them to leave alone. They were caught between their orders to harass and their instinct for self-preservation. "We was just leaving," the first man muttered, suddenly finding the floor very interesting. He and his partner shuffled out, giving Keona a wide berth. They mounted their horses and rode off, trying to reclaim their dignity with a cloud of dust. Keona held his position for a long minute, his presence a shield. He watched Evelyn, who was leaning against a crate, her breath coming in gasps. He gave her a single, slow nod, as if to say, "You held fast." Then he, too, was gone. The legal battle for the water was moving faster, and with more trickery. Hargrove and Whitlock appeared at Sheriff Ortega's office, not with guns, but with a new, thicker document. "It is a contract, Sheriff," Whitlock said, all smiles and polish. He tapped the paper, which was embossed with the seal of the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway, a lease. "My clients have leased the entire Stone Cup corridor for 99 years. They are subcontractors, tasked with securing the water for the construction teams." Ortega read the document. It was legal, it was binding, and it was a lie, wrapped in 20 pages of impenetrable text. He had been flanked. "This is a land grab, Whitlock, and you know it," Ortega said, his voice heavy. "It is progress. Sheriff, the well will be under private guard, starting tomorrow, to prevent the kind of instability we saw the other day." Ortega was beaten, but not broken. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing, searching for any foothold. He found one, a thin, dusty one. "I see, a private contract. But this is still the Arizona territory, not a private kingdom. And this lease, it affects the public right-of-way, which is governed by the Territorial Compact of 1864. I cannot allow you to enforce this until the community has been heard. I am calling a public hearing. In 3 days, you will present this document to the people, and they will have their say." Whitlock's smile faltered. "A hearing that is a procedural delay. It is irregular." "It is the law," Ortega said, tapping his tin star. "My office. 3 days. You will be there, or I will arrest your men for interfering with public access." It was a small victory, a delay measured in hours, but it was all he had. The next morning, the smell of smoke woke the town. It was not the familiar scent of hearth fires. This was the greasy, acrid stench of wool and oil and burning wood. A black column rose from the low hills to the east, a pillar of ink against the clean morning sky. It was the dying shepherd's camp, the one who had been beaten. His small sheep pen, his hogan, his entire life, had been reduced to a circle of smoldering ash. The sheep, a flock of perhaps 30, were dead, their charred bodies a grotesque monument. Keona and Ortega stood over the ruins. The ground was a mess of prints, but near the gate of the pen, set apart, was a single, perfect boot print pressed deep into the cooled mud. The star-shaped flaw in the heel was clear, as if stamped there by a notary. It was not just a clue. It was a signature, a boast. Kiona's face was stone, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. This, a fire to burn an old man out. This was a coward's work. It was the act of a man who poisoned the earth. That afternoon, he found Evelyn as she was dismissing her small class. He did not speak. He stood in the doorway, his horse waiting behind him, and simply motioned with his head. "Come." Evelyn, her heart leaping into her throat, looked at him. She felt no fear. She picked up her bonnet and her small notebook of empty pages. She told her last pupil to run home, and she followed Kiona. He led her out of town, away from the smoke and the lies, and up into the high country. He took her to a place of red rock and staggering silence. The air was thin and sharp. He was taking her to his church. He stopped, not at a well, but at a crack in the rock face, nearly hidden by sage. "Springboks," he said. He knelt, moved a flat stone, and revealed a small, clear pool, no bigger than a dinner plate, lined with carefully placed pebbles. The old ones built this. It catches the water before the sand can... He led her on, showing her a wash, a dry riverbed that looked dead, but he pointed to the roots of a cottonwood. Water runs underneath, always. She, in turn, began to draw. She was not a trained map maker, but she was meticulous. She drew the shape of the canyons, the location of the springboks, the path of the hidden water. He was giving her the land's secrets. He spoke more in those 3 hours than he had in the last 5 years. He told her how the water traveled, how the plants spoke of its presence. He treated the land not as a thing to be owned, but as a relative to be respected. He was giving her the evidence she needed for Ortega's hearing. He was showing her, in the only way he knew how, what was truly at stake. And she, with her paper and her pencil, was translating his truth into a language the white world might be forced to understand. But the white world was already talking when she rode back into town, just at dusk, sitting tall on Kiona's horse while he walked beside her. She felt the eyes. She had crossed a line. Women who were seen with Kiona Nez were settlers he had saved, or widows he had helped. They were objects of pity or charity, but Evelyn had ridden with him, willingly. She had spent the day with him, alone, in the hills. By morning, the whispers were a steady wind. The Navajo's girl, the women said over their laundry lines. Going native. Is she a disgrace to her father's memory? Agnes heard it in the general store. She slammed her coins on the counter, her voice as sharp as a cleaver. My niece is a lady, which is more than I can say for some in this town. She is doing the sheriff's work, which is more than your husbands are doing. Evelyn felt the stares, the sudden silences when she entered a room. It was a new kind of violence, a small, suffocating pressure, but as she stood before her small class, she remembered Silas Creed's threat. Silence is a virtue. She remembered Kiona's silent presence in the doorway. She held her head high. She would not be shamed into silence. She had work to do. The pressure on the town ratcheted up again, this time from the railroad. A boiler on a steam-powered derrick exploded at the main construction camp. 10 miles east, 2 men were killed, a half-dozen injured. It was a terrible accident, the result of shoddy equipment and overworked men. Whitlock saw an opportunity. He was in the telegraph office before the dust had settled. He did not wire for investigators. He wired for troops. Ambush. His message read, Boiler sabotaged by local savages. Hostiles threatening the completion of the transcontinental line. Send federal marshals. Send the cavalry. The situation is out of control. He was painting a picture of an uprising, using the blood of his own men as the ink. Sheriff Ortega was drowning. He had a hearing in one day, a town full of whispers, a burned-out shepherd, a railroad demanding troops, and a map drawn by a 19-year-old girl. He needed a witness. He got one. That night, one of Hargrove's men, the one named Jake who had threatened Evelyn, was in the saloon, drunk and flashing gold coin. He was bragging, his voice loud. That old shepherd, he will not be grazing nothing ever again. And that boiler. Accidents happen when people get careless. Ortega, sitting in the corner, had heard enough. He arrested the man for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace. He dragged him to the town's small, 2-cell jail and threw him in to sober up. In the morning, he would offer the man a choice hang for the boiler explosion, or talk about Silas Creed. Ortega felt a small, grim hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break he needed. He returned to his office at dawn. The cell was silent. Too silent. The man, Jake, was dead. He was hanging from the single crossbar by his own belt. His boots were neatly on the floor. His eyes were wide, staring at the far wall. It was a suicide, except it was not. Ortega looked closer. The man's hands were clasped in front of him. Rigor mortis already setting in. A man who hangs himself struggles. His hands would be at his throat, at the belt. And Kiona, who had appeared at the door like a shadow, pointed. His boots, he said, his first word of the day. Ortega looked. The boots were on the wrong feet. Left on right, right on left. A drunk man might do that. A man dressing a corpse in a hurry, in the dark, would definitely do that. It was a message, a setup, and a cleanup. Their only witness was dead, murdered in a jail cell by a ghost who walked through locked doors. Kiona looked at Ortega. The sheriff's face was gray, the color of ash. He looked like a man who had just watched his last chance burn. Kiona now saw the whole map. He saw the lies, the paper, the fire, the whispers, and the noose. They were all threads from the same needle, and the needle was in the hand of Silas Creed. But the money was in the pockets of Hargrove and Whitlock. The battle line was no longer invisible. It was here. It was now. And they were all standing on the wrong side of it, together. The murder in the jail cell hung over Coyote Ridge like a death shroud. Sheriff Ortega's last hope had been strangled with a belt, his boots put on the wrong feet as a final, mocking signature. The law was not just blind, it was dead. And then the sky turned yellow. It started in the late afternoon, the air becoming still, heavy, and holding a strange, sulphurous light. The wind did not rise, it ceased. The town held its breath. Then, from the northeast, the horizon vanished, replaced by a churning wall of red dust 1,000 feet high. The sandstorm hit Coyote Ridge not as a wind, but as an avalanche. It was a solid, screaming thing, a physical weight of grit and fury. It ripped the sign from the saloon and sent it cartwheeling down the street. It turned midday into a suffocating midnight. Evelyn Hart was in her small, borrowed schoolhouse when it struck. She had just dismissed her last pupil. She ran to the door and looked out, her heart seizing. The world she knew was gone, erased by a solid wall of airborne earth. She fought the door closed, the wood groaning as sand shot through the cracks, stinging her face like needles. She was trapped. She waited, huddled against the wall, as the small building shook, the roar of the wind an animal sound. 1 hour passed, then 2. The air inside was becoming unbreathable, thick with dust. She knew, with a cold certainty, that if she stayed, she might suffocate. She also knew that if she went outside, she would be lost in 10 seconds. Then she remembered. Kiona. The day he had taken her to the high country. As he had walked her back, he had pointed, not with his finger, but with his chin, the way his people did. "My Hogan," he had said, his voice quiet. "It is in the shelter of the 3 sisters." He pointed to 3 tall rock formations. "From your school. You walk toward the setting sun, 200 paces. You will find a wash, follow it north. The door faces east, always, to greet the sun." She had thought it was just conversation. Now she understood. It was a map, a lifeline. She tied her shawl over her head, covering her mouth and nose. She took a deep breath, cracked the door, and threw herself into the screaming red darkness. She could not see her own feet. She kept one hand on the adobe wall of the school, counting her steps. 1, 2, 3. She was walking blind, by faith. She reached the end of the wall, took a breath of pure grit, and stepped out, walking toward where she prayed the setting sun would be. The wind tore at her, trying to spin her around. She fell, her hands scraping on rock, and felt the unmistakable dip in the earth. The wash. She had found it. She turned north, crawling at first, then rising into a crouch, following the small channel of the dry riverbed. The only thing in this chaos that offered a path. The world was a screaming void, and she was a single, small point of determination moving through it. She felt the rock before she saw it, a solid wall, sheltering her from the direct blast. She felt her way along it, her hands raw. The 3 sisters, and there, tucked into a fold, was a dark opening, round and low. The door faced east. She fell through it, collapsing onto a floor of cool, packed earth. She lay there, coughing, the dust in her lungs turning to mud. She had made it. She was alive. The hogan was dark, the storm a muffled roar outside. A single ember glowed in a central fire pit, casting the faintest light on the round, timbered walls. It was warm, and it smelled of wood smoke, juniper, and something else, something clean and sharp. "Kiona," she called out, her voice a dry rasp. There was no answer. He was not here. She was coated, her skin, her clothes, her hair, with a thick layer of fine, red dust. Her eyes burned. Her throat was raw. She saw a skin bag of water hanging from a peg, and she stumbled to it, drinking greedily, the water tasting of minerals and life. Her first thought was to clean herself. In the dim light, she saw what looked like a separate room, a space partitioned off by a heavy wool blanket. She pushed it aside. In the gloom, she could make out a large, wooden tub, like a horse trough, filled with dark water. Thank God, a basin to wash the filth from her face. She leaned over, cupping her hands to scoop the water, but the floor was slick with something, and her boot, caked with mud, slipped out from under her. She gave a small cry, her balance gone, and she fell, sideways and awkward, tumbling over the low rim and into the tub with a heavy, soaking splash. The water was warm, and it was not water. It was thick, fragrant, and deep. She had not fallen into a wash basin. She had fallen into his bath. "Stay the storm." The voice came from the main room. He was here. He had been here all along, a shadow in the corner, silent as the earth itself. Evelyn froze, mortified. The warm, herbal water soaking through her dress, her petticoats, to her skin. The blanket partition was pushed aside. Kiona stood there. The light from the fire pit was behind him, silhouetting his tall frame. He could see her, a pale shape in the dark tub, her hair falling loose, her dress clinging to her. It was a moment that stretched for an eternity. Evelyn could not breathe. She was a virgin, the daughter of a minister, and she was, in all respects, naked in a tub of water in front of a man she barely knew, a man the town called a savage. Kiona did not move, did not speak. She expected a laugh, a curse, a lecherous stare. She got none of them. His stillness was absolute. He was not looking at her. She realized. He was looking at the wall just above her head, his face as impassive as stone. Then, with a movement so quick it blurred, he turned, grabbed a heavy wool blanket from his sleeping roll, and stepped forward. He did not look at her. His eyes were fixed on the door. He held the blanket out, a solid, eclipsing curtain, and dropped it over her, covering her completely from head to toe. He tucked it around her shoulders, his fingers brushing her wet hair for a single, impersonal second. Then he turned his back. "The water is clean," he said, his voice low, addressed to the far wall. "It is yucca and juniper, for the skin. The storm will last until morning. You are safe here." He walked back to the central fire pit, sat down on the earth, and began to tend the embers. His back a solid, unmoving wall of protection. Evelyn sat in the tub, hidden beneath the heavy blanket, steam rising from the water, her body burning with a shame that was slowly, inexplicably, turning into something else. The water was a comfort. It smelled of pine and soap and the clean earth. It was the scent of the man himself, and she knew, with a certainty that shook her, that the scent would stay with her forever. When the storm finally passed, the world was scoured clean. The morning sun streamed through the east-facing door, bright and unforgiving. Evelyn had long since climbed out, wrapped in the blanket, her wet clothes steaming by the fire. She had slept, exhausted, on a pile of soft furs he had given her, on the other side of the hogan. He had not slept. He had sat, watchful, until the wind died. Now, in the silence of the new day, he handed her a tin cup of hot, dark tea. It was bitter and sweet, made from desert herbs. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was still hoarse. For everything, for the shelter." He nodded, sipping his own tea. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was full, like the silence after a prayer. "I'm sorry," she said, looking into her cup. "About the bath." He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes were not guarded. They were just eyes, deep and tired and kind. "You were blind from the storm," he said. "You fell, it is done." "Your hogan," she said, looking around. "It is peaceful." "It is Hosho," he said, the word soft. "Balance. The storm is outside. In here, there is shelter. The world must be in balance." "My father, he used to say the world was a battle between sin and grace." "My brother," Kiona said, his gaze going to the fire, "died on the long walk. When the soldiers moved us, he died of a grace he could not find, and a sin he did not commit. Your father's words, they are for a different world." They spoke, he, in short, quiet sentences, told her of his brother, a boy who loved to sing, who had starved in the snow of the reservation. She, in turn, spoke of her father, a good man who loved God but who had been broken by the death of his wife, a man who saw sin in every shadow. They spoke of loss, and the words formed a small, simple bridge between the minister's daughter and the dying warrior. Her hair was a tangled, dusty mess. She tried to comb it with her fingers, a hopeless, frustrated gesture. Kiona watched her for a moment. He rose, went to a wooden chest, and came back with a leather thong. He did not ask. He simply knelt behind her, gathered the heavy mass of her hair in one hand, and with a few efficient movements, braided it. His touch was firm, impersonal, and more gentle than she could have imagined. He tied it off with the leather. "Thank you," she said, her voice small, her neck warm from his proximity. "I want to learn," she said, turning to face him. "What you know. I want you to teach me how to see the tracks, how to know the weather, how to read the world the way you do." He looked at her, a long, assessing gaze. "It is a hard book to read," he said. "I am a fast learner," she replied. The next day, she was back in her schoolhouse, the world clean and bright. He came, as he had before, a shadow in the doorway. But this time, he did not just stand guard. He stayed. He leaned against the adobe wall, his arms crossed, and he listened. Evelyn was reading to her pupils, her voice clear and strong. She was reading from her own small, worn book, a poem by a woman from Amherst. "Hope is the thing with feathers," she read. that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Kiona did not understand the words, but he understood the tune. He watched her, and he watched the children, the Anglo, the Hispano, the Dine, all watching her, their faces rapt. He was trading his gift of the earth for her gift of the word. Sheriff Ortega was not feeling hopeful. He sat in his office, staring at his ledger. He had it. The proof of payment from Hargrove's bank account to Silas Creed, dated 2 days before the shepherd's camp was burned. It was a chain, but the last link was missing. He had the money, he had the crime, but he had no witness. Creed was the only one who could connect the payment to the fire, the only one who could testify against Hargrove and Whitlock, and Silas Creed was a ghost. The news that came next was a final, fatal blow. A rider galloped in from the east, his horse lathered. He was from a small ranch near Stone Cup. "They are doing it! Sheriff," he shouted. His voice cracked. "Hargrove's men and a dozen railroad toughs. They are not just fencing the well, they are capping it, filling it with rock and cement. They say it is permanent." A crowd gathered, their faces pale. The early signs of drought were already on them. The grass was brown, not green. The streams were a trickle. Capping Stone Cup was not a legal move. It was a death sentence. Kiona and Ortega found each other in the crowd. Their eyes met over the heads of the panicked town. The time for law, for paper, for waiting was over. "He will be there," Kiona said, his voice so low only Ortega could hear him. "Creed. He will be supervising. He would not trust a job this important to anyone else." Ortega nodded, his face grim. "I cannot arrest him. Kiona, he will kill me, and I will be dead, and he will be gone." "Do not arrest him," Kiona said. "We hunt him." He laid out the plan, his words quick and precise. Creed would not return to town. He would take the high pass, Lukachukai, to get back to the railroad camp. "He thinks he is a hunter," Kiona said. "But he is lazy. He follows the easy trail. I know a place, a Narrows. We can take him, alive." "We," Ortega said, his eyebrows raised. "He is your witness," Kiona said. "I am your guide." "I am coming with you." The voice was Evelyn's. She had pushed through the crowd, her face pale but set. "You will need a nurse. He will be hurt, and I speak some Dine. If you find other witnesses, I can translate." Ortega looked at her, his face a mask of disbelief and pity. "Miss Hart, this is not a poetry reading. This is an ambush. Men will die." "Men are dying," she said, her gaze steady. "Of thirst, of fire, of being hanged in your jail. You need me. I am coming." Kiona looked at her, at the hair he had braided, at the new, hard strength in her eyes. He said nothing, but he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That night, Evelyn packed a bag, not with dresses but with bandages, carbolic, and her father's small, silver-plated pistol. She looked at it, then put it back in the drawer. She packed the map she and Kiona had drawn instead. Her Aunt Agnes stood in the doorway, watching. She said nothing for a long time. Then she came forward and pressed something into Evelyn's hand. It was a silver ring, heavy and old, set with a single, large piece of blue turquoise. "This was my mother's," Agnes said, her voice thick. "She crossed the plains wearing it. It has seen trouble, and it has seen joy." She closed Evelyn's fingers over it. "Do not let anyone, child, not Hargrove, not Whitlock, and not him, do not let anyone teach you to love out of fear. You go because you must. That is all." Evelyn put the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. Lukachukai Pass was a jagged scar in the earth, a place where the high desert squeezed itself between cliffs of red rock. It was a natural chokehold. Kiona led them there in the dark, moving with a confidence that felt ancient. He, Ortega, and Evelyn, 3 broken pieces of a town, come to hunt a man who was more broken than all of them. Kiona positioned them with the precision of a man setting a trap for a wolf. Evelyn was high, tucked into a crevice in the rock face with the medical bag and a skin of water. She had a clear view of the pass below, a position of terrible, passive observation. Sheriff Ortega was 100 yards further down, behind a jumble of fallen boulders, his rifle resting on a flat rock. He was a good shot, steady and calm. Kiona himself was everywhere. He did not pick one spot. He moved through the dawn light, dusting the trail with powdered stone to mark the perfect kill zone. He used a small, sharp piece of flint to rig a trap, a loop of yucca fiber, strong as new rope, hidden just beneath the dust in the one place a man would dismount for cover. He checked the sun, a rising sliver of fire. He climbed to a high perch, opposite Evelyn, and settled. He became rock. They waited. The silence of the pass was absolute, broken only by the high, thin cry of a hawk and the pounding of Evelyn's heart. Just after 9 o'clock, they came. 4 riders, moving at a lazy pace. Silas Creed was in the lead, his pale hair a bright spot in the sun. He was laughing, his head thrown back. His men were relaxed, their rifles in their scabbards. They were victors, returning from a conquered well. They rode past Evelyn's hiding place, so close she could smell the sweat of their horses. They rode past Ortega. They entered the kill zone Kiona had marked. A glint of light, sharp as a needle, flashed from Kiona's position. It was not a mirror. It was the sun catching the barrel of his rifle as he moved it into place. Ortega fired. His shot was not at a man, but at the rock face just above Creed's head. It exploded in a shower of stone chips, a loud, cracking command to halt. The riders yelled, pulling their horses, reaching for their guns. A second shot, from Kiona's high perch, took the hat off one man. A third shot from Ortega struck another man's rifle, spinning it from his grasp. The pass was a box, and the echoes made 2 guns sound like 6. "Ambush," one of Creed's men yelled. Turning his horse to flee, Kiona's next shot, precise and cold, hit the man's stirrup, shattering the wood and his balance. The man fell, his foot caught, and his horse dragged him, screaming, back the way he had come. The last man, seeing this, threw his hands in the air, his face as white as paper. Silas Creed was different. He was not a cowboy. He was a soldier. He dove from his horse, rolling, coming up with his pistol in his hand. He scrambled for the only cover available, the small cluster of rocks where Kiona had laid his trap. He took 2 steps, hit the dust, and his right foot vanished. The yucca loop snapped tight. He pitched forward, his ankle held in an unbreakable grip. He fired his pistol into the ground as he fell. Before the sound of the shot had died, Kiona was no longer rock. He was a shadow falling from the cliff. He landed, silent, and was on Creed in 2 steps. Kiona did not strike him. He simply put his boot on Creed's wrist, pinning the gun hand to the earth. He kicked the pistol away. He knelt, his knife in his hand, and calmly cut the rope trap from Creed's ankle. He did not bother to tie him. He just looked at him. The fight was over. It had taken less than 30 seconds. Ortega came up, his rifle on the 2 remaining men. "Get on your bellies, both of you." Silas Creed sat up, rubbing his ankle, a look of pure, professional hatred in his faded eyes. He spat a wad of bloody dust. Well, that was a neat little trick. Scout. He looked at Ortega. "So you got me. Sheriff. What now, you gonna hang me for that drunk in your jail?" "No," Ortega said, tying Creed's hands behind his back. "You are going to be a witness. You are going to tell a judge who paid you to burn that shepherd's camp. You are going to tell him who paid you to kill Jake." Creed laughed, a genuine, mirthful laugh. "A witness, you old fool. You think a courtroom matters out here?" He nodded toward the pass. "The law in Coyote Ridge. It does not come from your tin star. It comes from Hargrove's bank. It comes from Whitlock's pen. It comes from the railroad. You are just a relic. Old man. Maybe, Ortega said, pulling him to his feet. But you are my prisoner. You are making a mistake, Creed sneered, his confidence returning. He was not afraid. He was annoyed. He looked at Kiona. He is just a puppet. He will talk. Oh, I will talk, Creed said. I will tell you anything you want. Yeah, Hargrove paid me. He is paying me to clear the corridor. He and Whitlock, they have a beautiful plan. They are taking all the Dine cattle, the ones they have not shot yet. They are going to rebrand them with a fresh iron, sell them to the railroad for 100% profit. And guess who they are going to blame for the rustling? He grinned at Kiona. You, the wolf shadow. It is a perfect, clean little operation. And you just arrested the only man who can make it run. Evelyn had come down from the rocks, her face pale, but her hands steady. She looked at Creed with a coldness that was new to her. You are a monster. No, ma'am, Creed said, tipping his head to her. I am just a businessman, and you three, you are about to be bankrupt. The ride back was tense, the triumph already souring. Ortega led the procession, his two new prisoners tied and walking in front. Kiona rode behind, leading Creed's horse. Evelyn rode beside Ortega, her back straight, the turquoise ring on her finger. Silas Creed, mounted, was tied to Ortega's saddle horn. They were a mile from town, in a shallow, open wash, when the shot came. It was a single, heavy thwack, the sound of a high-powered buffalo rifle. It came from the ridge to the south, a shot from at least 500 yards. Sheriff Ortega stiffened. He looked down, a strange expression of surprise on his face. A dark, wet circle was spreading over his left shoulder. He slumped forward and fell from his saddle like a sack of grain. Evelyn screamed. Kiona was moving before Ortega hit the ground. He vaulted from his horse, pulling his rifle, and threw himself in front of Evelyn, grabbing the reins of her horse in his. "Get down," he yelled. He fired 3 quick shots at the ridge, not at a target, but at the puff of white smoke, buying them seconds. Creed, still tied to the saddle of the now dead Ortega's horse, laughed. "Sniper, you are all dead." Kiona ignored him. He ran to Ortega, who was lying in the dust, his face a shocking, pale gray. Kiona grabbed him under the arms and dragged him, and Evelyn, pulling her horse, scrambled with them, all 3 of them tumbling behind the low, eroded bank of the wash. Evelyn, her hands shaking so badly she could not open her bag, ripped Ortega's shirt open. The wound was high, in the muscle of the shoulder, but it was bleeding with a terrible, pulsing rhythm. "This is your fault. Scout!" Silas Creed's voice was gleeful from 50 yards away, where he was still tied, a perfect, stationary target. "You bring war everywhere you go. You cannot even protect an old man." Evelyn fumbled with the bandages. "He is bleeding too fast," she cried, her voice thin with panic. Kiona grabbed her wrist. His hand was like iron. "Evelyn, look at me." She met his eyes. "You know what to do. You know the land." Her eyes cleared. She looked at the wound, then at the bank of the wash. She saw what she was looking for. A yucca plant, its spiky leaves a dark green. She ran to it, oblivious to the sniper. She pulled her father's small knife, the one she had packed after all, and sliced open the thick, fleshy root. A clear, sticky sap oozed out. She ran back to Ortega and packed the thick, gummy sap directly into the wound, on top of the artery, then applied a thick pad of bandages, tying it off with all her strength. The bleeding slowed. It stopped. "Well, I am damned." Creed yelled, "The little lady is a field doctor." Kiona looked at Creed. A cold, pure rage was building in him, a rage he had not felt in years. "He is right, you know," Creed said, his voice softer, conversational. "This is on you. You could have killed me in the pass, the old way, the warrior's way. But you did not. You wanted to play the white man's game. You wanted to be their good, quiet Indian. He leaned forward as much as his ropes would allow. You remember the days you wore the blue coat. Kiona, remember scouting for the army. Remember what they paid you for, to hunt your own, to lead them to the hidden places. This is no different. You are weak. You are not dying. You are not white. You are nothing. Kiona stood up. He walked out from behind the bank, into the open, his knife in his hand. He walked toward Silas Creed. "Kiona, no!" Evelyn screamed. "The sniper!" Kiona did not stop. He did not look at the ridge. He looked only at Creed. Creed's smile vanished. He saw what was in Kiona's eyes. Kiona reached Creed. He raised the knife. Creed flinched, closing his eyes. Kiona cut the rope. He cut the rope tying Silas to Ortega's saddle. He grabbed the reins. "If he shoots," Kiona said, his voice a lethal whisper. "We all die. Now, ride." He slapped the horse and, pulling Creed behind him, ran, leading the small, broken party. A moving target. No second shot came. The sniper, his job only half done, was gone. They limped into Coyote Ridge. Ortega was a dead weight, tied to his saddle, his face ashen. Evelyn rode beside him, her hand on his uninjured arm, as if holding him in the world. Kiona walked ahead, leading Creed's horse, his rifle in his other hand. The town was waiting. They had heard the shot. When they saw their sheriff, a low animal sound went through the crowd. Before Kiona could even get Creed to the jail, a voice cut through the silence. "Sheriff, my God, what has happened?" "Mr." Whitlock stepped out of the saloon, his face a mask of practiced concern. He was not alone. He was flanked by two men in dark suits, their coats unbuttoned, their hats square. "This is a terrible business," Whitlock said, his eyes on Creed. "Thank goodness you apprehended this man. Kiona, he is a key witness." "He is my prisoner, Whitlock," Ortega rasped, his eyes fluttering open. He was barely conscious. "My witness for murder, for the fire." "I am afraid not, Sheriff," Whitlock said, and he sounded genuinely sad. He produced a crisp document. "This is a federal writ, signed by Magistrate Titus in Prescott. Mr. Creed is a person of interest and a material witness in the sabotage of the Federal Railroad line. He is being taken into protective custody." The two men in suits stepped forward. They were not marshals. They were Pinkertons. They untied Silas Creed, their movements efficient. "This is not legal," Evelyn said, her voice shaking with fury. "My dear Miss Hart," Whitlock said, "it is the very definition of legal. We cannot have local squabbles interfering with national progress." Silas Creed stood up, stretching his shoulders. He looked at Kiona. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at the bleeding, dying sheriff. He smiled, a small, private thing. Then he turned and walked with the men to the telegraph office. A free man. The news hit the town like a physical blow. The law was a joke. The well was capped. The sheriff was dying. Hargrove, seeing his moment, rode into town with a dozen men. They did not even stop at the saloon. They rode straight to the town square, to the public well, the last source of water. They began, in the fading light, to hammer posts into the ground, to unroll barbed wire. The people gathered, Anglo settlers, Hispano families, the silent, watchful dine. They were all thirsty. They were all trapped. The square became a tinderbox of fear and rage, a pressure cooker with no valve. Evelyn and Agnes had gotten Ortega to a small cot in the jailhouse office. Agnes, her face grim, was cleaning the wound, which was already festering. "He needs a real doctor," she muttered. "He is burning up." Ortega's hand fumbled, found his badge. He unpinned it. "Evelyn," he whispered. She leaned in close, her hair brushing his feverish face. "The hearing," he panted, his breath catching. "Tomorrow, sunrise. It stands. You tell them. You hold the hearing." "I cannot," she cried. "They will not listen." "You must," he said. "The law must stand." He passed out. Night fell. A heavy, starless, suffocating night. Kiona stood in the shadows of the alley across from the way station. He was watching. He saw it all. He saw the fire before it was lit. He saw two men, Hargrove's men, slip from the alley behind the way station. He saw the glint of a tin of coal oil. He saw the match. He did not yell. He did not run for water. He moved. He was inside the house, kicking in the back door as the flames were just beginning to lick the kitchen curtains. Agnes was in her room, asleep, exhausted. He found her in the smoke. He wrapped her in a blanket, lifted her as if she were a child, and carried her out the front door. Evelyn was already in the street, roused by the sound of breaking glass. She screamed as she saw her aunt, a bundle in Kiona's arms. "I am all right, child," Agnes coughed, finding her feet. He saved me." But the fire was fast. The dry old wood of the way station went up like a torch, and the flames, hungry, jumped the small gap to the adobe schoolhouse. The roof, made of dry timbers, caught instantly. Evelyn gave a cry, a sound of such profound loss it stopped Kiona's heart. "No, my map. The books, the list." She ran toward the burning building. Kiona grabbed her, his arms like steel bands, holding her back as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks, sending her map of the water, her book of poems, her entire fragile case, into the night sky as ash. She did not fight him. She just sagged, turning, burying her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking with sobs of rage and despair. Kiona held her, his face lit by the orange flames of her burning school, his eyes fixed on Hargrove's men who were watching, laughing, from the end of the street. The war was no longer about law. It was about survival. Sunrise came not with light, but with judgment. The air over Coyote Ridge was thick with the ashes of the way station and the school, a bitter incense on the wind. The sun rose, a bloody eye, illuminating the town square, which had become a battlefield of nerves. Hargrove's men stood guard over the newly fenced public well, their rifles held casually, their confidence an insult. The townspeople gathered, not as neighbors, but as tribes, the Anglo settlers, their faces pinched with thirst and fear, stood near the ruins of the general store, the Hispano families, quiet and watchful, gathered by the alleyways. And on the edge of the square, a large group of dine had come down from the mesas, led by the old shepherd whose arm was still in a sling. They were silent, their blankets a slash of color in the gray, dusty morning. In the center of the square, where the public well now stood behind barbed wire, someone had placed a single, battered wooden barrel. It was a mocking gesture. It was less than half full. It was the town's altar, and it was a symbol of their shared, dying hope. Then a sound, a scraping. The crowd parted. Agnes Black and Evelyn Hart emerged from the jailhouse office. Between them, they pushed Sheriff Thomas Ortega on his narrow cot. They had wheeled him out into the sun he would not live to see set. He was pale, his skin slick with fever, his breath a shallow rasp. But he was in his uniform. He had made Evelyn pin his tin star to his shirt, though it was crooked. His eyes were barely open, but they were fixed on the square. Kiona was already there. He was not with the dine. He was not with the whites. He stood alone by the burned-out shell of the blacksmith's shop, a shadow that the new sun could not erase. He was watching Hargrove. The sound of boots on the boardwalk announced the victors. Whitlock appeared, flanked by Hargrove. The lawyer was clean, pressed, and smelled of bay rum. He carried his leather satchel. "Good morning, citizens," Whitlock said, his voice carrying in the dead air. He unrolled a large, impressive document. "This is not a hearing. Sheriff Ortega, in his condition, was mistaken. This is an announcement. per the authority of the United States government and the Santa Fe Railway. This entire water corridor is now under private management." He held up the document. A lease signed by a territorial judge in Prescott, a joint venture between Mr. Hargrove's cattle operation and the railroad. "We are ensuring the security of this region. We are stopping the instability, the fires, the sabotage that has threatened progress." He looked, just for a second, at Kiona. "We are bringing order. The water will be controlled. It will be rationed, for a price. To those who are partners in our venture." Hargrove smiled. A wide, predatory grin. He and his men were the partners. Everyone else was a customer. And the store was closed. A low moan went through the crowd. They were beaten. The paper had won. Evelyn Hart stepped forward. She was covered in soot. Her hair, the hair Kiona had braided, was matted with ash. The turquoise ring on her finger was the only clean thing about her. She was not holding a map or a book. She was holding a single, cracked piece of slate, rescued from the fire. "Mr. Whitlock," she said, her voice clear, not loud, but it cut through the despair. "Sheriff Ortega called this hearing according to territorial law. It has not been concluded." Whitlock laughed, a small, pitying sound. "Miss Hart, your aunt is homeless. Your school is gone. Your evidence is ash. The hearing is over. Go home." "This is my home," Evelyn said, "and my evidence is not ash." She held up the slate. "You burned my school, Mr. Whitlock, but you did not burn the lesson. I spent the night with my pupils, all of them, the ones who could be found. We wrote this together." She turned to the people, to the Hispano mothers, to the Anglo settlers, to the Diné grandmother in the front. "My name is Sarah. I am 6. My name is Miguel. I am 8. My name is Ta. I am 7. Water is the first lesson. Water has no color. Water has no name. It is not yours. It is not ours. It is. You cannot own the rain, Mr. Hargrove. You cannot put a fence around the sky." She looked directly at Whitlock. "You told me you were bringing civilization. Is this it? Teaching children that the law is just a word for thirst?" "She is got a point. Counselor." The voice was rough, dry, and full of a terrible amusement. The crowd parted again. Silas Creed stepped out of the alley. He looked like a man who had crawled out of his own grave. He was caked in dried blood and dirt. His left arm was in a crude sling. His right hand was wrapped in a massive, filthy bandage. But Evelyn could see the dark, wet stains, and she could see that at least 2 fingers were gone, sheared off. Whitlock's face went white. You are a fugitive." "Am I?" Silas said. He walked, slowly, until he stood in the center of the square, between the barrel and the law. "Those Pinkerton boys you hired were very professional. They had very clear orders to take me to a quiet place and make sure I did not trouble anyone, ever again, just like Jake." He looked at Whitlock, his faded blue eyes devoid of all warmth. "Turns out, I am harder to clean up than a drunk in a jail cell. I had to leave a little piece of myself behind to get away." He flexed his bandaged hand, and a fresh line of red soaked through. "You are insane," Hargrove snarled, his hand dropping to his gun. "I am a businessman," Silas said, his voice flat. He turned his gaze to the cot. "Sheriff, I believe you wanted my testimony. I am here to give it. I am changing my investment. I do not like partners who try to cash me out." Ortega struggled, raising his head an inch. His voice was a bare whisper. "Speak the truth, Creed." "The truth," Silas nodded, as if tasting the word. "All right, the truth is, Hargrove paid for it all. But Whitlock, he gave the orders. He ordered the shepherd's camp burned. Make a point, he said. He ordered Jake killed in your jail. Clean up the loose ends, he said. I was the last loose end. He wanted the valley, he wanted the water, and he wanted it clean. No witnesses." The world stopped. Hargrove did not shout. He did not argue. He roared, a purely animal sound, and he pulled his pistol. He did not aim for Silas, the man who had betrayed him. He aimed for Ortega, the man who represented the law that had, in its dying breath, finally caught him. "You are dead, oh man," he screamed. He never finished the thought. Kiona moved. He was not a shadow. He was a strike of lightning. He did not dive in front of the cot. He dove over it, a blurring motion, his body colliding with Hargrove just as the man's finger tightened on the trigger. The gun fired, the bullet going wide, splintering the empty barrel of water. The square exploded. Hargrove's men, seeing their boss wrestling in the dust, drew their weapons. The townsfolk screamed and scattered. Kiona and Hargrove were a tangle of limbs, but it was not a fight. It was a dismantling. Kiona moved with a brutal, economic grace. He broke Hargrove's wrist with a sharp twist. The gun clattered on the stones. He struck the man once, a hard, calculated blow to the jaw that snapped his head back. Then a new sound, the click of a hammer. "Stand down." It was Ortega. He had used the last ounce of his life to pull his own pistol from the holster on his cot. He was shaking, bleeding, but he was aiming, not at Hargrove, but at Hargrove's men. He is to be taken alive," Ortega gasped, his voice a reedy, terrible command. "For trial. The law stands." That single impossible act of will broke the spell. The townsfolk, who had run, stopped. They looked at the dying sheriff, holding a gun he could not possibly fire. They looked at Hargrove, spitting blood, his gun on the ground. They looked at Kiona, his knife in his hand, not using it. The blacksmith, the one whose son was in Evelyn's class, picked up a hammer from his ruined shop. The Hispano washerwoman grabbed a piece of burning timber. The crowd did not run away. They surged forward. Hargrove's men, seeing the tide turn, seeing 100 angry, thirsty, desperate faces, dropped their guns. It was in this chaos that Whitlock fled. He had not drawn a gun. He had simply vanished. Kiona saw him, a dark suit scrambling onto a horse, galloping east, toward the railroad, toward the new dam they had built to divert Stone Cup. "He is getting away," a man shouted. Then the ground shook. A deep, heavy boom rolled over the town, a sound bigger than a rifle, bigger than dynamite. It came from the east. A moment later, a rider on a fast horse galloped in, his face wild with panic. "The dam, they blew the main pipe, the last of the water. It is all running into the arroyo. It is all gone." A silence fell, deeper and more terrible than the gunshot. They had won the square, but Whitlock, in his final act, had just executed the entire town. Evelyn looked at the stunned faces. She looked at the dying sheriff, who had just traded his life for a law that was now meaningless. She looked at the dying women, who stood, watching, their faces impossible to read. And she remembered the map, the lines he had shown her. "The Atsequia," she screamed, her voice cracking. She ran to the ruins of the store, grabbing a burned shovel. "The old channel the Hispano ditch Kiona showed me. It runs below the break." She started to run, east, toward the sound of the vanishing water. For a second, no one moved. Then the old dying shepherd said something in his own language, and the dying women moved. They were not running. They were grabbing picks, blankets, anything. They knew what to do. The Hispano men, hearing the word Atsequia, their grandfather's word, followed. Then the whole town, Anglo, Hispano, Dine, a single, desperate mob, ran with Evelyn Hart to the arroyo to build a new dam out of mud and blankets and sheer, unadulterated will. Kiona did not run with them. He had seen Whitlock. He saw the lawyer on horseback, halfway up the far side of the canyon, heading for the high railroad trestle that crossed the arroyo. Kiona did not think. He vaulted onto the horse Hargrove had been riding and kicked it into a gallop. He caught him on the bridge. It was a high, spindly thing, Made of raw timber, built fast and cheap, Whitlock was halfway across. He turned, his face a mask of terror, and fumbled a small derringer from his vest pocket. "This is civilization," he shrieked, his voice thin in the wind. "Progress. You cannot stop it. You savage!" Keona did not slow down. He launched himself off his horse, his body a spear, tackling Whitlock, the derringer firing harmlessly into the sky. They crashed onto the wooden planks. It was an ugly fight, a fight of desperation. Whitlock was a man of paper, soft and weak, but he fought with the fury of a cornered rat, scratching and biting. "It is my investment," he screamed, his hands clawing at Keona's face. "The law, the contract." Keona said nothing. He was just a force of nature. He was the earth, pushing back. He was the water, claiming its own. The bridge, never meant for such a struggle, groaned. The timbers, old and dry, splintered. Whitlock saw an opening and tried to push Keona over the edge, into the 100-foot drop. Keona rolled, the motion fluid, the rotten planking beneath Whitlock, where he was bracing himself, gave way with a sound like a gunshot. The lawyer's polished boots slipped. He scrabbled, his hands finding only air. He gave a high, thin cry, and his hand, by pure reflex, grabbed the front of Keona's shirt. Keona grabbed his wrist. For a single, silent second, they hung there. Keona, his feet braced on a solid timber. Whitlock, dangling over the abyss, his life held by the man he had called a savage. "Help me!" Whitlock screamed, his arrogance gone, replaced by pure, white terror. "Help me, I will give you anything, money, the water, the contract." Keona looked down at him. He saw the man who had ordered the fires, the murder, the slow strangulation of the land. He saw the face of greed. The wood of the bridge groaned again. The strain was too much. The entire section they were on, weakened by the struggle, tore free from the canyon wall. With a scream of tearing wood and a final, desperate cry from Whitlock, the bridge, Keona, and the lawyer all fell, locked together, into the deep, dry arroyo below. The fall was a chaos of splintering wood, dust, and a single thin scream that was cut short. Keona and Whitlock hit the bottom of the arroyo in a cloud of red grit, entangled with the wreckage of the trestle. The drop was 100 feet, but a deep pool of soft, ancient silt, turned to a soupy mud by the first trickles from the broken pipe, had saved their lives. Keona felt the snap of bone before he felt the pain. A heavy 10-foot timber, part of the bridge, had landed across his left leg, pinning him to the arroyo floor. He was trapped. Whitlock had been thrown clear. He lay gasping, his fine suit shredded, his face a mask of mud and terror. For a moment, he was just a broken man. Then his eyes, darting, saw something half buried in the silt a few feet away. His derringer, fallen from his vest. He lunged for it. He was a creature of pure, animal panic, a rat in a trap, and he now had a tooth. He scrambled to his feet, his polished boots slipping, the small, two-shot pistol a black toy in his shaking hand. Keona, seeing the move, grabbed the timber pinning his leg. He roared, a deep, guttural sound of pure effort, and tried to free himself. But the wood was too heavy. He was helpless. Whitlock staggered over, leveling the pistol at Keona's head. His face was a grotesque mess of fear and triumph. He was laughing, a high, unhinged sound. "Civilization!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. I told you the law, the contract. You, savage, you broke the bridge. You ruined the investment. You cannot stop progress. You are just dirt." He was ranting. His mind snapped, waving the pistol. He was trying to steady his hand for the killing shot. "No." The voice came from the rim of the arroyo, sharp and clear. Evelyn Hart stood there, her clothes torn and stained with mud from her work on the ditch. She was holding her father's silver-plated pistol, and she was aiming it, with both hands, at Whitlock's chest. Whitlock turned, his eyes widening. He gave a wet, gasping laugh. Another one. The little schoolteacher come to join the savages. Go on, girl, pull the trigger. Be just like him. This is the world you wanted, the world of the gun. Evelyn's hands were shaking so hard the barrel of the pistol drew circles in the air. She saw Kiona, trapped. She saw Whitlock, a murdering ghoul. And she heard Ortega's dying whisper, "The law stands." She lowered the pistol. She did not drop it. She placed it, deliberately, on the rock beside her. "No," she said, her voice shaking but full of a new, cold power. "This is not your world. It is ours." Her eyes darted, found what they were looking for. A thick, ancient yucca plant grew near the rim, its fibers strong as steel. She ran to it. She did not have a knife. She grabbed the central, sharp-edged leaves and pulled, her hands slicing open, the pain a dull throb. She pulled and twisted, a long, fibrous rope of green, tough fiber coming free in her bleeding hands. She ran back to the edge. "Kiona!" She threw the rope. It uncoiled, landing in the mud near his shoulder. Whitlock, distracted by her, turned his head to laugh. "A rope, you stupid." That turn, that single second of arrogance, was his undoing. He shifted his weight, and his polished, heelless boot found the patch of quicksand-like mud that had cushioned their fall. He slipped. His arms flailed. His face a perfect picture of comic surprise. The Derringer fired. A harmless pop, the bullet burying itself in the mud wall. The gun flew from his grasp and vanished, swallowed by the silt. He fell, hard, on his back, a pathetic, gasping fish, all his power gone. Kiona grabbed the yucca rope. Evelyn, on the bank, did not pull. She braced herself, wrapping the fibers around her raw hands, becoming an anchor. Kiona used it for leverage, planting his free foot. With a deep, shuddering groan, he pulled his leg free from the timber. The pain was white, blinding, but he was free. He stood, his left leg screaming, and limped over to the whimpering, mud-caked lawyer. Whitlock stared up at him, his face a ruin of terror. "Please," he whispered. "Mercy, it was just business." Kiona's knife was in his hand. He had not drawn it. It had always been there. He looked down at the man who had ordered the fires, the beatings, the murder, the desecration of the land. He saw the face of the plague. He saw the weak, terrified man who had destroyed his world. He could end it. One thrust, the warrior's way, a clean, just ending. He looked up. He saw Evelyn on the bank, her hands bleeding, her face pale, watching him. She was not afraid of him. She was waiting. She was trusting him. He sheathed his knife. He took the yucca rope from his waist, the one he had used for the trap, and he knelt in the mud. He began, with efficient, impersonal movements, to tie Whitlock's hands behind his back. "If the law is to come to this land," Kiona said, his voice a low rasp, thick with pain, "it must begin here, not with a bullet, with a rope. He is right." The voice was a dry rattle, like leaves in a dying wind. Both Kiona and Evelyn looked up. Sheriff Tomas Ortega was on the canyon rim, a few yards from Evelyn. He was no longer a man. He was a ghost, held upright by Agnes on one side and the blacksmith on the other. His shirt, his coat, his trousers were soaked, not with mud, but with a dark, uniform red. He was bleeding from every pore. But he was here. He was smiling, a terrible, bloody grimace. He held up a single, crumpled, blood-stained piece of paper. "The affidavit," Ortega whispered, the word costing him everything. "Silas Creed. He signed it before he slipped away. He told it all. Hargrove, the fire, Jake, you, Whitlock. He traded it all for his horse and a 1-hour head start." He looked at Kiona. his eyes nearly blind, finding the warrior in the mud. A look of profound, weary, and final respect passed between them. "You did the hard thing. Mr. Nez, the right thing. He is a prisoner of the law." As Ortega spoke, as that last word left his lips, something changed. A single, cold drop of water hit Evelyn's cheek. She looked up. The sky, which had been a clear, brassy, unforgiving blue, was clouding over with an impossible, unnatural speed. A second drop hit Kiona's forehead. A third hit the bloody paper in Ortega's hand. And then the heavens opened. A sudden, unseasonable, torrential rain began to fall. It was not a storm, it was a baptism. It was a clean, cold flood that washed the red dust from their faces, that turned the blood on Ortega's shirt to a thin pink wash, that began to turn the dry, dead arroyo into a trickling stream. The sky was weeping, or it was forgiving. The hozo, the balance, was returning, not with a song, but with a flood. High above, in the town square, the people saw it. They had just finished their desperate patch dam. They were standing, exhausted, looking at the trickle of water they had saved. They saw the rain. They saw the spectral figures on the canyon rim. They saw Kiona, standing over his captive. They saw their sheriff, held up by their neighbors. A living crucifix. A new sound went up. Not a cry of despair. A roar. They did not need the diverted water. They had the rain. They had the well. They ran, as one, back to the town square. The blacksmith took his hammer, and with a single, mighty blow, shattered the lock Hargrove's men had put on the public well. The crowd, Anglo, Hisgapano, Dine, tore the barbed wire down with their bare hands. They threw the posts onto the dying embers of the way station. A woman, the Hispano mother whose son was in Evelyn's class, began to pump the handle. The sound of creak thump was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was the sound of a new, shared law. The water, clear and cold, gushed out, and they did not fight. They shared. In the chaos, no one saw him. No one saw the pale-haired man, his hand a mass of bloody rags, slip from the livery stable, leading the best horse. Silas Creed was a shadow. He had given them Whitlock. He had given them Hargrove. He had bought his freedom. He left one thing, a final, cold calling card. He drove his long, bone-handled knife, the one with the serpent carved on the hilt, deep into the wood of the sheriff's office door. A promise that the future was not yet safe, but the balance had shifted. In the arroyo, the rain was turning the world to mud. Kiona, his duty done, tried to climb the slick bank. He could not. His leg gave way. He fell back, a sharp, gasping sound ripping from his chest. It was not just the leg, the fall, the bridge. Something inside was broken. He could not get his breath. Evelyn, seeing him fall, scrambled down the bank, sliding in the mud. Not caring, she reached him as he was leaning against the canyon wall, his hand pressed to his ribs, his face gray, his lips blue. "Kiona," she cried, her voice thin with a new terror. "The law was saved, but he was dying. You are hurt, you're breathing." He could not speak. He just looked at her, his dark eyes full of a sudden, shocking vulnerability. He was gasping, the air not coming. She put her hands on his chest, as if she could force the air into him. She felt the shudder of his ribs. She did not know what to do. She had no tools, no medicine. She had only what was left. She pressed her ear, her whole head, against his chest. She pressed her face into the wet, soaking leather of his shirt, against the skin and the muscle and the bone, praying to hear it. She needed to hear the steady, strong, anchoring beat of his heart. It was the only word that mattered, the only law she understood. And in the roar of the rain, against the thunder of her own panic, she heard it, faint, labored, but there, thump, thump, a promise. Thomas Ortega did not die. He was, as Agnes Black later put it, too stubborn for God and too mean for the devil. He lay in his cot in the one room of the jail that had not burned, his breath a wet, shallow thing, and he held on to life with the same grim tenacity he had held on to his office. The rain that had saved the town also saved him. It cooled his fever, and it brought the mail coach, which, by a miracle, was carrying a real doctor, an army surgeon on his way to a new post in Tucson. The surgeon, a man with whiskey on his breath and hands that were nonetheless steady, dug the .50 caliber slug out of Ortega's shoulder in Agnes's kitchen, which had survived the fire. He declared the man would live, though he would never again have the full use of his arm. While Ortega began the long, slow climb back to life, the law, the real federal law, finally arrived in Coyote Ridge. It came, not as a single marshal, but as a full territorial circuit judge, a man named Titus, the same magistrate whose signature had been on Whitlock's writ. He rode in with 6 cavalry troopers, his face like a granite tombstone, furious that his authority had been so thoroughly and violently corrupted. He was not a man of the railroad. He was a man of the book, and he found his book had been set on fire. He held his court in the saloon, the only building large enough, his desk set up on the stage where the piano player usually sat. Hargrove and Whitlock, who had been fished out of the arroyo by the blacksmith and held in the town's remaining cell, were brought before him. They were no longer titans. They were just 2 men, one with a broken jaw and a splinted wrist, the other still caked in mud, his fine suit in tatters. The trial lasted 3 days. It was not a trial of nuance. It was an avalanche of truth. The first witness was Silas Creed's affidavit, the bloody piece of paper that Ortega had clutched like a holy relic. Judge Titus read it into the record, his voice booming, the signed confession detailing the conspiracy, the order to burn the shepherd's camp, the murder of the witness, Jake. Then came the town. The old dying shepherd came, his arm in a sling, and he pointed at Hargrove. The Hispano washerwoman, whose son was in Evelyn's class, testified to the beating she had seen. The blacksmith, the store owner, Agnes Black. They all spoke, their voices no longer whispers, but a steady, angry chorus. Evelyn Hart was the last witness. She walked to the front of the saloon, her dress clean, her hair braided. She wore the turquoise ring. She did not speak of the attack, or the whispers, or the fire. She simply unrolled the map she and Kiona had redrawn, a fresh copy, made in the jailhouse while she watched over Ortega. She tacked it to the wall, and for an hour, she taught the judge. She taught him the law of the land, the location of the springs, the path of the hidden water, the sacredness of the markers. She spoke of the children. She spoke of the lesson on the slate. She did not cry. Her voice was the clearest thing in the room. Hargrove, his jaw wired shut, could say nothing. Whitlock, however, tried to speak. He stood, his lawyerly instincts returning, and he began to rant about contracts, about progress, about investments, about the savagery of the frontier. Judge Titus listened, his face impassive, for 10 minutes. Then he held up his hand. "Mr. Whitlock," he said, his voice cold, "you speak of civilization. You seem to be under the impression that civilization is a thing you build with iron and paper. You are wrong. Civilization is a thing you earn. With decency and respect for the law, you have done neither. You are, sir, the most profound savage I have ever had the misfortune of meeting." The sentence was swift. Hargrove and Whitlock were found guilty. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of arson, guilty of theft of public resources, guilty of subverting the law. Hargrove's land, his cattle, his assets, were declared forfeit to the territory, to pay for the damages he had caused. He and Whitlock were sentenced to 20 years of hard labor at the new territorial prison in Yuma. When the cavalry led them out, in chains, not a single person in town watched them go. The rebuilding began the next day. The rain had softened the earth, made it ready for new seeds. The freight company that had owned the burned warehouse, hearing of its role in the fight, gave the land to the town. The blacksmith and the Hispano-masons, using the timber from the wrecked trestle and the good, new adobe mud, began to build. They did not rebuild the way station first. They rebuilt the school. It was a proper building now, with 2 rooms and real glass windows, bought with the first proceeds from the sale of Hargrove's confiscated cattle. Evelyn's classroom was full of light. She had 30 students. She had slates for every one of them. She had books, sent by a fund the judge himself had started in Prescott. She taught them letters and numbers. She taught them from her map, which now hung on the wall, a permanent document of the acequia and the springs. And she taught them history, a new history. She told them of the din, of the Hispano, of the long walk, and of the shared thirst that had made them one. The way station was rebuilt, smaller but stronger, its wood new and smelling of pine. Agnes Black was its proprietor, and her mortgage was paid in full. The biggest change was in the center of the square. The barbed wire was gone. In its place, a new council was formed. The Coyote Ridge Water Council. Its members were Agnes Black, for the town's business, the Hispano man who had led the digging of the new ditch, and the old Dine shepherd who spoke for his people. They drafted a document, a charter. It was written in English, and then, with Evelyn acting as translator and scribe, it was written in Dine, using the phonetic symbols a missionary had taught her. It was the first bilingual law in that part of the territory. It said, simply, that the water belonged to all. It set the times, 1 hour for the town, 1 hour for the Dine herds, 1 hour for the Hispano farms. It was nailed to the side of the new well. The law, for the first time, was not a weapon. It was a cup. Thomas Ortega recovered, but he was not the same. He sat on the porch of the jail, his left arm in a permanent sling, his face older. He was still the sheriff, but he could no longer draw a gun, and he could no longer ride the long patrols. One afternoon, a young Dine man, the son of the shepherd, came to the office. He had been one of Evelyn's first pupils, a man of 20 who had wanted to learn to read the white man's paper. He was smart, he was quiet, and he could ride like the wind. His name was Ta, or, as Evelyn had written it, Tate. Ortega looked at him for a long time. Then, he unpinned the deputy's badge from his own desk. He held it out. "You know the land," Ortega said. "You know the law. You can write your name. That is more than I ever could." Tate pinned the badge to his shirt. It was a new kind of justice, a new kind of administration, born of fire and necessity. Kiona had not been in town for the trial, or the rebuilding, after the fall, after Evelyn had pressed her ear to his chest. He had been carried by the blacksmith and the Dine men back to his hogan. His leg was broken, a clean snap of the tibia. 3 of his ribs were cracked, which was why he could not breathe. He had healed, in his own way. He had set the bone himself, using splints of juniper and yucca ties. He had refused Agnes's laudanum, preferring the pain. He needed the world to be sharp. Evelyn had come, once, with the army doctor. The doctor had looked at Kiona's handiwork, grunted, and said, "He will walk, but he will have a limp, and he is a fool for not taking the medicine." Kiona had spent the weeks of the trial in the silence of the mesa. He had lain on his sleeping fur, staring at the ceiling of his hogan, listening to the world rebalance itself. He was done. He had hunted, he had protected, he had held the line, and he had, finally, brought the law. His part was over. He performed the rites, the quiet songs of thanksgiving, the small offerings of corn pollen for the return of Hosho. He was a man at peace, but it was a lonely peace. One evening, as the sun was setting, painting the cliffs a shade of bruised purple, he heard a sound, a horse. Not a man's horse. It was the easy, ambling gait of the mare he had seen Evelyn ride. She appeared at his door, which was open to the east. She was not dressed in her town clothes. She wore denim trousers, like a man's, which he had never seen her wear, and a simple blue shirt. Her hair was in a single braid. She did not wait for an invitation. She stepped inside. She was carrying a canvas bag. "Hello, Kiona," she said, her voice soft in the round room. He just nodded. Miss Hart. He was sitting by his fire pit, his leg propped on a stool. She came and sat, not close but not far, on the other side of the fire. The space between them was warm and lit by the low flame. "Ortega is well," she said. "He has a new deputy." "I know," Kiona said. "Tate, he is a good man. He reads." "The school is built," she said. "The way station is open. The water is shared." "I know," he said. He watched her. She was different. The soft, green innocence of Missouri was gone. She was as lean and strong as a yucca plant. She opened her bag. "I did not come to ask you to stay," she said, her voice very quiet. "Or to thank you. I am done with words like that." She pulled something out. "I came to bring you these." She handed him a book. It was not her book of poems. It was a thick, leather-bound volume, a treatise on engineering and hydroponics. "I thought," she said, "you might want to see the white man's maps of water, to know what they will try next." He took the book. He turned the pages, looking at the strange, precise diagrams of aqueducts and pumps. He almost smiled. She pulled out a second item, a small cloth sack. "And these," she poured them into his hand. "Seeds, not corn, not beans. They were strange. Small seeds. They are from a man in California. They are called apple seeds. They say you can grow them in the desert, if you have water, and you graft them to the wild roots." He looked at the seeds, then at her. It was the most profound gift he had ever been given. She was not offering him love. She was offering him a future. She was offering him a reason to stay. She reached out, and her fingers, the ones she had sliced open on the yucca, brushed the back of his hand, the one that held the seeds. It was a simple, light touch, a touch of skin on skin. It was not a promise. It was not a debt. It was just a fact. They were here, by the same fire. He turned his hand, and his fingers closed over hers. Just for a second. His hand, calloused and scarred. Her hand, calloused and scarred. It was an agreement. She looked at him, and her eyes were clear. That night, in the storm, she said, "In your hogan, it has been a long time, but the smell of the juniper, the yucca, it never really left me." He knew the scent of her, the clean, terrified, innocent scent, had stayed in his blankets, in his room, for days, a ghost of her presence. It was the bridge, the moment of her fall, and his turning away. The moment a virgin had slipped into his bath by mistake, and his life, and hers, had changed. She stood to leave. He did not ask her to stay. He did not ask her to come back. She paused at the door, looking out at the new, bright stars. "I am teaching the big children how to read the stars. On Tuesday nights," she said, not looking at him. "Tate is learning, but none of us know their dine names. We would be grateful for a teacher." She left. He listened to her horse's hoofbeats fade, a soft, steady rhythm, until they were gone. He sat by his fire, holding the book and the seeds, a man with a broken leg, and for the first time in his life, a reason to plant a tree. Back in town, the sheriff's office was quiet. Ortega was asleep. Tate was on patrol, nailed, not to the door, but to the wall above the desk, was the knife of Silas Creed. It was no longer a threat. It was an artifact. It was evidence, a permanent, cold reminder that the law was not a book, and it was not a gun. It was a thing that had to be watched, every night, forever. The rains came, as they always do, but this time they felt not like a cycle, but a blessing. The water, which had begun with the unseasonable storm of the Great Fight, settled into a steady, life-giving rhythm. It washed the last of the ash from the burned timbers. On the scarred earth where the way station had burned, a carpet of tiny, impossible green appeared. First, the new sprouts of yucca, tough and defiant, and then a scattering of wildflowers, blue and yellow, a promise from the earth that it was willing to forgive what men had done. The new schoolhouse, built of fresh adobe and smelling of pine from the timbers, was finished 6 weeks after the trial. It was not built in the center of town. It was built near the Stone Cup Well. Its doors opened onto the vast expanse of the mesas, and its windows looked back toward the small, healing town of Coyote Ridge. Evelyn Hart stood on its new porch for the dedication. The entire town was there. She wore a simple calico dress, and the turquoise ring was on her hand. Beside her stood the members of the Water Council Agnes, her face softened by a new security. The old dying shepherd, his arm now healed, standing tall, and the Hispano farmer, his hat in his hands. Evelyn did not make a long speech. She simply called her pupils forward. There were 32 of them now. Miguel, the Hispano boy, stood beside Ta, the young dying man. Sarah, the blacksmith's daughter, shared a slate with the shepherd's granddaughter. They did not recite a poem. They recited the law. Miguel began, his voice clear. "Water is life," Sarah continued. "Life is shared." Ta finished, his voice deep and strong, first in Dine and then in English. "Sharing is the law." Then, the blacksmith and the shepherd unveiled the new sign over the well that Hargrove had tried to destroy. It was a simple plank of carved cottonwood. It did not say Coyote Ridge. It said Stone Cup School, and beneath that, "Water is life, sharing is the law." The rhythm of the town changed. The barrier at the public well, the one in the town square, was now a schedule. The one written in 2 languages. At 6 in the morning, the Dine women came, filling their skins and barrels, their laughter and talk a new, welcome sound in the street. At 8, the Hispano farmers filled their water wagons. At 10, the Anglo townsfolk. The wall of suspicion, built over generations, had not vanished, but it was lower. It was now possible to see and to speak over the top of it. They were no longer tribes. They were, finally, neighbors, bound not by friendship, but by the ironclad, life or death logic of a shared water pipe. Tomas Ortega was on the schoolhouse porch for the dedication. He sat in a chair, his left arm in a permanent black sling, his face thin, but his eyes were alive. He watched Evelyn, and he watched the children. After they had recited their law, he pushed himself to his feet. He was not wearing his badge. He held it in his good hand. It was an old silver star, dented and worn. He did not give it to Tate, his new deputy, who was standing, watchful, at the edge of the crowd. Instead, he walked into the new schoolroom. He walked past the rows of new benches, past the big iron stove, to the wall where Evelyn had hung her new, beautiful map. He looked at it for a long moment. This New Testament, with its lines of water and its boundaries of respect. Then, with a single, deliberate motion, he hammered a nail into the wall, and he hung his badge, the symbol of the old, broken law, directly over the heart of the map. He turned to Evelyn, who had followed him inside. "I am an old man. Miss Hart," he said, his voice quiet. "I spent my life trying to enforce the law with a gun. I was wrong. The law does not begin with a badge." He tapped the wall, his finger next to the silver star. "It begins here. It begins with teaching a child how to read. The rest is just noise." Kiona was not at the dedication. He had been healing, in his own way, in his hogan. His leg was strong, though, as the army doctor had predicted, he walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp, a permanent reminder of the cost of the law. He had taken the apple seeds Evelyn had given him and, with a strange, new patience, he had begun the long, slow work of grafting them onto the tough, wild roots of the native crabapple trees. He was planting a future. He came to the school a week later. It was Tuesday. Near dusk, he walked in, his moccasins silent on the new floorboards. Evelyn was at the front, by the big map, talking. Her star class, as she called it, was there. Tate, the deputy, the blacksmith's oldest son, 2 Hispano teenagers. They were all trying to map the heavens. Evelyn stopped, her hand at her throat. When she saw him, he was a shadow in the doorway. "You are late, Mr. Nez," she said, a small, bright smile touching her lips. "I was busy," he said, the word coming slowly. He was not a man for excuses. He walked in, his limp more pronounced in the quiet room. He was not carrying a rifle. He was carrying a small, round object. He walked to the front, to her. He held it out. It was a hand drum, small, made of stretched hide, the wood polished smooth, a painting of a hawk on its face. "For the school," he said. She took it, her fingers brushing his. "It is beautiful." "A song," he said, "is a map for the heart. The children should learn both." He stayed. He did not sit with the others. He leaned against the wall, next to the map, beneath Ortega's badge. He listened as she spoke of the white man's stars, of Cassiopeia and Orion. She paused and looked at him. "But we do not know their true names. Kiona, their Dine names." Kiona looked at the class. He looked at Tate, his deputy, a man of 2 worlds. He looked at Evelyn. He had come here, not for her, not for the town. He had come because the world, for the first time in his life, felt right. The balance, the hozo that he had felt only in the deepest canyons, was now here, in this room, in the faces of these children, in the steady gaze of the woman with the yucca braided hair. He was not an outsider. He was, finally, a part of the whole. "The star you call the hunter," he said, his voice low but carrying in the room. "We call Atse Etsi, the first slim one. He is a warrior, yes, but he is a warrior who brings the dawn. He runs to tell the sun it is time to wake up." He had chosen, he was staying, not because he was bound by a woman or by a debt, but because, for the first, Evelyn and Kiona stayed until the stars were white chips of ice in a black sky. They walked out of the schoolhouse together. The air was cool and smelled of juniper and the clean, mineral scent of the new running water. The stream, the one the town had saved, was just behind the school, a ribbon of silver in the moonlight. They stood by its bank. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say that the day had not already said. He was a man with a limp. She was a woman with a scar on her hand. They were 2 people who had been broken by the land and remade by it. He looked at her, at the line of her jaw in the moonlight. She looked at him, at the stillness in his eyes. She leaned her head, just slightly, against his shoulder. He did not tense. He did not pull her closer. He just accepted the weight of her. A solid, warm, living presence. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice a murmur against his shirt, "we will teach the children how to measure the stars." He put his hand over hers, the one that rested on his arm. His hand was rough, like bark. Hers was strong and steady. He felt the silver and turquoise of her aunt's ring. "Tomorrow," he agreed. He turned his head. He kissed her. It was not the kiss of a conqueror, or a lover, or a husband. It was a kiss as quiet as the night, as necessary as the water. It was a formal, gentle, and profound promise. A kiss of respect. A kiss that said, "We are here." In her rebuilt office, Agnes Black lit a new lantern. She opened her new ledger. She looked at the column of figures, the income from the Water Council's public fund, the new trade from the railroad. which now stopped in a town that was orderly and safe, the room and board from the stagecoach, which was running again. For the first time in 10 years, the numbers were not red. They were black. The town had accepted a new order. She closed the book, satisfied, and went to bed. In the West, in that hard, red land, freedom was a complicated word. It was not the freedom to take, to fence, to own, or to conquer. It was not the freedom to shoot first and ask questions later. The real freedom, the one that Kiona and Evelyn and Ortega and Agnes had finally bought, with blood and ash and courage, was a much harder, quieter thing. It was the freedom to choose what was right, especially when it was easiest and simplest, to just start shooting. Thank you so much for listening to our story, Wild West Tales. We are so grateful you spent your time here with us. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to connect and share our thoughts. Please consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and if you really enjoyed the tale, hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more folks. We will see you in the next story.